Hello, I'm Kochanski, Wilderness Living Skills and Survival Instructor. I'm getting on in years, so I would safely say that I've spent about 40 years making a living teaching people outdoor ed, which includes survival, modern survival, living off the land, talking to people who are worried about the apocalypse, and so on. So you find that if you appeal to a broad enough audience, you can be kept busy making a living at this. At least I managed to pull it off at any rate. Today's topic generally is going to be around the issue of what you carry. The more you know, the less you carry. The less you know, the more you carry. So the issue here is that if you have not had the opportunity to train to survive barehandedly, to survive in such a way that I think you would call the preliminary to barehanded survival is called bushcraft, that you haven't had the time to learn the identification and the usages of all the materials available to you, like they have been to the Aboriginal people, so that you can relate to the outdoors relatively easily and get by like the native people did before the white man came in particular. You know, the issue is a big difference between having to learn to survive and having to learn how to live like our ancestors might have. And the difference might be 1 or 2 university degrees of all I know. So the more you know, the less you carry. The less you know, the more you carry. And the upper limit of how much you carry is about what a backpacker might choose for a well-outfitted backpack, which is probably over 50 pounds, if not more likely 70. It's very easy to find that you're going to have a lot of weight to carry if you plan to go out there for a long time, because for every day out you could probably carry a pound of food. So if you're out for 30 days, your food maybe is 30 pounds, and when you cook up that pound of food that day, you got 4 pounds of edible, and there you go. You tend to carry on a normal existence totally independent of the natural environment. You don't build shelters because you brought it. You don't harvest, don't snare animals and dig up roots because you brought your own food, and so on. Well, there is a compromise. It is kind of awkward for you to be carrying a great amount of weight when you've got other things to do. You could be surveying. I met some surveyors that were taking some kind of sensitive seismic readings or some kind of readings where magnetism and everything was very, you had to really stay clear of it, so they couldn't carry any metal objects on their body. And the problem was the helicopter would drop them off at their starting point, and then at the end of the day the helicopter would appear maybe 10 kilometers or more further down the line and pick them up, and they go home for supper. But then the weather socks in so badly that the helicopter can't really travel or be able to locate them, or whatever the situation would be. It becomes heavily overcast. Now they have to wait for the helicopter, which may mean that now they're a camper who have to at least endure that night without any metal on their body, which means no knives, no axes, no saws, and so they might carry certain things. Well, maybe the metallized portion of the Mylar blanket, but they could probably carry something like clear polyethylene and very quickly make something that would keep them dry. But anyway, their kit was very specific, and kits are, if I'm using the right term, very specific to exactly what you're up to. So the kit of a pilot will be different from a backpacker. Backpacker's already carrying a kit, but a backpacker maybe is worried that when they set their kit aside and go for a hike and then discover that separated from their camping equipment, they have to camp without camping equipment, so they carry a fraction of what they brought in, so they can divide up. And so if you got a 50-pound kit, 5 pounds is your survival kit, which is something that is always on you. and 5 pounds is perhaps, you can bear that. 5 pounds can probably fit into this bag. This is actually a ditty bag, which is meant to keep pots like this from dirtying your equipment. You put it in there, but if you put belt loops on, then you find that now you thread that through your belt and you have a substantial amount of carrying capacity on your belt. Now this is sewn out of waterproof materials. When you go to put out a campfire and you don't have a pot big enough, on and on. You've got many uses, and perhaps if you put a thumb in this, you might discover that when you need a mitt for some reason, or perhaps around the campfire handling hot objects. Well, anyway, there are so many things that you can make one item do the work of a half dozen items. The issue is that you have to study the art of what you bring, and everything you bring will have a multiplicity of uses. So you have to decide what's important enough to bring. Well, to my way of thinking, there are two things that you focus on when you pack a kit. When you take that item and you look at it and you say, how does this help me sleep? Or sleep that much better? Should I have to camp out without my camping gear? How does this item help me meet my water needs? Because there's those two things you need to really pay attention to when you're surviving. Now, many people find they can't sleep because it's too cold, but you will reach a certain point where you're so sleepy that you're going to fall asleep, and you won't wake up from that, because in the issue of being so unconscious in your sleep, you essentially freeze to death, you might say. You die of exposure. You die of extreme fatigue. Well, you always want to sort of think when you walk off the beaten path and you say, what if I am detained at this time of year? What will I do? Well, a guy like me will say, well, if there's snow on the ground and it's minus 25 at night by the crack of dawn, then you've got one type of objective here. Because if there's anything you will find that you will fear, a lot of things I fear. The cold, being bitten by a rattlesnake, being accosted by ticks, being hounded to death by mosquitoes, by drowning crossing a river, by eventually I will die of hunger if I stay long enough, like many explorers did, because they couldn't keep up the volume of food that they needed. And a normal person who doesn't pay much attention to the quantities they eat don't realize that it's a complex matter to be able to fill your stomach when you don't have a supermarket or you don't grow a big garden, sort of thing. But the first objective is that you're worried about cold. And cold can mean a low temperature, could even mean rain and the wrong clothing. You can draw body heat pretty seriously if you're wearing cotton, a cotton t-shirt, and the rain and the cold that you will find after the sun is set is enough to do many people in, because had they taken off their t-shirt, they would have survived. But leaving their t-shirt on, the cotton chilled them that much more rapidly, and as a result they didn't last beyond the 38 hours. And a lot of people just don't know what it takes to do you in. Some people are very hard to kill, and other people are very easily dispensed with. At any rate, so here I have a shelter. Now when we're putting kits together, there's a lot to be said about something that is inexpensive, light, and compact. Bulk. This here drives us nuts because this arrangement is very bulky. This arrangement is essentially the package here that comes from the store, and perhaps combined with another package. So you might choose to carry these two things to meet your shelter needs, but the challenge will be you're going to have to deal with the fact that these are two separate items, and you're going to have to manage to make a bubble that has no holes in it, because a hole the size of your finger in the top of your shelter will drain the heat just like smoke out of a chimney, and you're not going to be able to utilize what you need to utilize to be able to stay warm till morning, you might say. Or you will modify it like I did this, but once you take everything out of its packaging, it is like popcorn and becomes much larger. So the compactness itself might demand that you do your modification in the field. You have to add that on top of the incident that caused you to have to endure that survival episode. But the issue is that you have to take all these things into consideration. Now, it's a little late to buy these two things, stick them in your survival kit, and the first time you're putting these up is in the survival episode. Of all we know, you have a dislocated shoulder or a broken ankle, or you're very hungry, or you're very exhausted or something. There'll be a lot of things that'll sort of be trying to stop you from enjoying things and maybe even stop you from doing your modification. So you gotta figure out a way to make this more compact. There probably is, but the normal person who folds and rolls stuff up has to be taught how to go about that. Here, when you take one of these things apart, this is the equivalent of a blanket, which is something that puts us into survival mode right away, because if I use this as a blanket, because it says survival blanket in here, and you interpret that as meaning, oh, I'm familiar with blankets. When I was a little person, my mother used to wrap me in a blanket. I know what a blanket is. Well, you got to remember that blankets that you're familiar with have substance to them, like this sock here has got thickness to it, and this sock helps to keep me warm because of its thickness, and that thickness implies a special term called insulation. Well, if I take this apart, I can twist it together in this form, which will bring it back to about the same volume or even smaller than what it was before you unfurled it. That's one of the issues, but generally in a survival kit, your items in your kit are often made so that it's a one use. You put it up and you're going to wait for a rescue, so you're not going to take it down and put it up and have the problem of folding everything up. But in training, you like to recycle and not go endure the expense of always bringing out a new item every time you go to use it. Because that eventually will cost you, in my case, probably $1,000. If I probably have used 1,000 of these Mylar sheets, if not 2,000 in my lifetime. At any rate, it's pretty compact. And when I found that this sold in the dollar store for $2, I was ecstatic. But after a while, I realized that the situation being that this Mylar, it's a plastic, a special kind of plastic. It's not polyethylene. Polyethylene is a different construct. And this Mylar, for $2, it appears like I've got about 4 times as much. Well, twice anyway. But when I unravel it, if I compare the sizes, the square yards, the square meter that I have here is 3 or 4 times what it is of the ordinary blanket. And the manufacturers that make these, their focus is on saying blanket. Therefore, their focus is thinking, well, we make these to replace blankets. But they don't warn you that this is used in an entirely different way than a woolen blanket is. And that mistake causes a lot of people to get into trouble because they don't understand the science behind it. I think in Sweden, I thought I heard a rumor that they were going to outlaw the sale of these Mylar blankets in Sweden because so many people got into serious trouble depending on them and misusing them. Mylar, the first rule that I teach my students is that the way to use this blanket is to use it as part of a shelter. And the closer you can get to it without touching it, the better. That is the ultimate secret of the use of this Mylar stuff. Well, when they give you little blankets, and you have to use 3 or 4 of them to cover your structure, and the wind wants to tear them away and blow them away, the size that the manufacturer provides is very frustrating when you in reality need 4 or more times to cover this. The same applies to the polyethylene, except that it happens that the drop sheets that they make are big enough to cover furniture and all kinds of stuff. So you'll find that there is probably a magical size that you want to minimize the amount of fiddle-faddle, and that this one looks like it cover a vehicle, a car. There's a picture in here showing that. So that means that this much polyethylene, you can make a substantial dome and there would be a lot left over. But when you're going to use clear polyethylene, then you get a book on how a greenhouse functions, because essentially the principles you're applying are the ones that make a greenhouse work. When you start using Mylar, now it takes the place of the reflective material that we find in nature, which is essentially the one thing that I know reflects two things. One is snow, the multitudinous little facets, and on the other hand, water at the right angle will give you a double sunburn, you might say. So now we're warning you that we have all these challenges that come up. Now we might choose to pay, I don't know, you'll pay probably $25 for a pot like that, and it fits in this one, or you pay $1.50 of the makeup of this fruit can was the pot. So we'll say that we have that. And then if we have a pot, to make it safe, and if we use flexible wire, I always use a functional length of wire. So I might say, oh, an arm span of wire, put it on my pot, and should I need wire, it's there on my pot. And and instead of, and then I fold it so that I have a minimum of 2 wires. But if I fold it again, and I have a minimum of 4, then I perhaps have something that's not going to, and the way we work with wire is you tend to wind it so that it stays together, and then you, on the one side you can get away with this. I think you don't, I've never seen wire break where it's attached. So I get that through, and then this is called the larkspur when you put the other end through. Now wire has its own properties. Don't make the assumption you just go buy a spool of it and you're going to use it like the old professional or like a trapper. When you're setting snares, there's quite a bit of idiosyncrasies that are found in wire that have to be mastered in order for you to be able to do a good job as a trapper, using wire as your major means to ensnare creatures. Now that might be a little short, so I should have made sure it was fingertip to fingertip long, but at any rate, and the holes that I discovered recently are very easily made by the use of needle nose pliers. Perhaps as an item, a camping kit, a pair of needle nose pliers has got its merits. But if you grab the thing and go, but if your pliers have been used a lot and the corners aren't sharp, it's a struggle to make those holes so conveniently. But I've done this hundreds and hundreds of times to make class sets. We make class sets of pots of all the same size for boiling competitions. When you're in the instruction mode, you'll find very often the people who tell you what they want will ask that you examine the course takers to find whether they have absorbed. Now, the issue of safety, you double your wire at least, because when one wire is broken, hopefully you will notice and replace the bail. Or you make your bail out of something that is unbreakable. Snare wire and flexible wire has the tendency that if it flexes enough, it breaks. It takes an awful lot of effort to flex a coat hanger wire, so it would have been more appropriate, all my bails that I would tend to make. But if I go off the beaten path, this is the way I store some of my kit, is the wire here might be, if it's from your a wire that goes completely around your head, that's long enough to set a snare. And if I got this much wire, that's 4 snares. So today I might be wanting to set snares with my and manage to not hang my pot. I don't know. You have that sort of objective that you might solve problems. But at any rate, we discover when we undo this, I think it looks something like this. If you haven't folded it properly, like you expect that it's expanded to the volume of the gallon, as I find, or if it hasn't, then you notice that it only takes a certain amount. And I think this is twice as big as it needs to be. It would go in there, and right off the bat, you've packed two things: a tube tent and a pot. These go a long way with regard to your being comfortable. If you're going to bring a knife and you tend to wear it around the neck like I do, then you might consider a knife and this metal rod that gives you 10,000 fires at least, or whatever. And the knife that, if you're wondering what's a suitable knife, now, like everything else, you have probably 100 different knife styles, but what we want is a universal woodworking tool. And the interesting thing is that when you buy this rod, the people who manufacture them produce another object that puts us into the space age. But the device that you use for scraping, which is probably 1/3 of the whole issue. Here, for example, you might have that the scraping device is often of such a standard that you do poorly on account that the scraping device is not up to it. So if I carry one of these rods, I always make sure that the corners on my knife here are razor sharp. I mean, are as sharp as they can be, because then you get an incendiary spark that lights fire on 1 or 2 strokes instead of spending 5 minutes scraping trying to get that fire going. So the knife and the means to fire can be on there. I also have another device that one thing that I have in my part of the world that can be very annoying is rose bushes, where you get a substantial thorn in your hand and it's so deep that it needs a tweezer to deal with it. And even with the tweezer, you have to go through some excruciating digging to be able to get rid of something that could give you a blood poisoning or a boil in the extreme situation. So those 3 things are always on me, handy right there. Another thing that I always would have handy in my hat is a few safety pins, and I examine the tip of the safety pin and put it to the test to make sure that the tip is sharp enough to dig for slivers. So 1 or 2 of these in your hat, I don't know, a 75-year-old person would venture to guess that maybe it's made life worthwhile to have the safety pin in your hat everywhere you go, so that the moment you get an annoying sliver that you can dig it out. And I also used to carry a fishing hook as part of my headgear, and I discovered that there were many times I was able to enjoy fishing as a surveyor because I had the means. So you set it up in such a way that it can be safely carried in your hat. But at any rate, these little pointers go a long way. They don't cost much, and they go a long way to keeping you comfortable. So we have a pot. Now, minimal pot is 7 cups. Here's a pot I've used since probably Thomas Roycroft gave me this. It was packed in the RCAF survival kits. Miro was the company. It had a lot of features. This was the coffee pot, and there was a percolator inside, which we don't bother bringing in the field. Take out the percolator. Here you've got a pot that's relatively easy, that if you understand that you can't grab it barehanded if it's been hanging over the fire. You've got a bail that lasts the life of the pot. Probably some hole will form in the pot before this ever breaks. You've got a lid that fits on in such a way that should the pot, you purposely mangle the lid, so should the pot fill it full of water, let it drop, If the lid stays on, you've got the right way to put the lid on, because whatever you got in your pot is lost through this. You can, in some versions, I think, we have actually flattened that spout, but it's handy to pour with, because you could have, it's just one of those things that's there already. Then you got a ring on the lid, because you can tie it down so it doesn't get lost. So you got a lid that keeps everything out. You can carry water to supplement your canteen. Yeah, you can use it for digging holes by scooping the dirt out, and you've got all kinds of things that go there. Now that is a tad small for my liking, and I discovered that there's a similar pot. That's 7 cups. This is probably 10. And I have more room to pack items. And I like to include in a pot this size a down jacket. Actually, the down jacket would take half your pot, and the other makings in the pot would have room to be fitted in there. So the down jacket must not have synthetic fill in the sleeves. Or you want to go lighter, you cut off the sleeves and just use the down jacket as a vest, and you would stuff that in. I just don't happen to have it handy at the moment. At any rate, this goes in here. Now my knife is on the outside, but you might include your rod in there. Now, believe it or not, if you shopped around enough, this is a sleeping bag, and it's probably rated to -25. It's made out of Mylar, and a kind of a cell structure that as you open it, it expands into insulation type cells. So this is probably, I might have paid $40, $50 for it, but if you want to go compact, I would say. Now the issue here is, you say to yourself, it's cold out. It's so cold that if I have to stay out tonight, I have to make a camp, and I have to camp out, and I don't think I'll get lost. Therefore, I'll build a great big fire and stand around all night till it's light enough to see and walk back to my vehicle. So I'm going to have to stay out there. Oh, I am familiar with the type of fire. I need logs that perhaps hug size is the best size. So when I build a fire, I don't have to put another stick on for hours. Well, how am I going to achieve that? Well, you must realize that in the boreal forest, where we have copious amounts of fuel and everything, that maybe there is some merit to carrying an axe like that. But gee, isn't that awfully awkward? Oh, you don't even want to carry the axe. Well, the axe would be very handy to quickly build a lean-to and buck up enough wood for the night and whatever. Well, the other alternative is to take a pot and stuff it, carry a sleeping bag. And all you have to do is make a bough bed where all you need is your bare hands, and find a protective spruce, or it's even relatively easy to harvest boughs with the bare hands, so you can protect your sleeping bag from snow or rain if need be. And so you've chosen the sleeping bag form of survival. Now, if you choose not to bring a sleeping bag or to bring an axe, it better be between the middle of May and the middle of September, because the likelihood is you're going to find that the challenge is extreme. So after about living with native people for about 4 years, you know how to get by without the axe of that, because you know how to approach that issue of, and perhaps your whole total learning process cause you never have to stay out as a camper overnight when you don't want to, sort of thing. Now, a saw, I can take this blade and I can make my own frame instead of this marvelous frame, and I can coil the saw blade in that pot. Or in some cases, I would say, now if I was a pilot, I would be ecstatic to have this on board my plane, because of the fact that it's those teeth there, they always create a kind of a damaging situation to anything near it. And here you have a means to pack your saw blade away in a But the problem is the maker made this length of blade because he makes it about 6 inches shorter. I always say a survival saw is not a saw unless it's at least this long. So a saw blade, as you manufacture your frame, an axe, well, I don't know, maybe you can take the handle off, just carry the axe head, but the axe in itself is awfully heavy. It is almost pushing most of the weight of the kit you would carry. Now, another thing that we have on the table is a signal mirror, and it better be glass. Here are all kinds of little odds and ends. They always say, oh, we never go in the bush without a whistle. Or maybe it's, here's somebody that manufactures a compass and a whistle, and if they would have made this out of glass at the back, it would be a signal mirror. Now that would be astounding. A signal mirror, if it's made out of plastic, I very quickly find that plastic loses its shine and it doesn't have the resolution that you might need. You want this signal to be seen over the horizon. You don't want it to be seen only a couple hundred feet away. And plastic, in my experience, is not suitable as a material for signal mirrors. Anyway, something like this goes there. Now, everything you do in the bush is usually tied together. So when you're finished packing all the other precious essentials, then you fill, well, one of them would be this mule tape, because with it, pack strap, should I want to build a pack frame, tow cable, should I want to extricate a stuck snowmobile or something, so that goes in there. Then after that, if there's any spare room, some people might just fill that spare space with paracord, 550, 200. The parachute shroud line that has a tensile strength of 550 pounds, keeping in mind that a 5-pound, you cannot row against a person, two people can't row in a rowboat against a person with 5-pound line attached to the boat. And so you have this that lends itself to be adapted to whatever you need. You have a tremendous amount of fine string. So we usually say 550, which is the tensile strength, 200, which is the safe working load, and the number of strands, and here is 7. So it's 550, 200-7, because there are other lines. There's some that you don't know what they're rated at, but it's fuzz instead of string. And this string is 35-pound test. Quite suitable for gill nets or fish nets or landing nets. And if you unravel one of these strands, then you find that you don't have to carry dental floss. But there could be some place in my kit that I carry sewing needle and dental floss, and my dental floss is both for dealing with the issues of a seed stuck between my teeth, or for stitching, doing stitches. And so you have extracted 1/3 of 35 of all I know, but this is unbreakable with the normal hand, but it's a very strong thread. So you've got this versatile material that covers a huge range. That's probably strong enough to set snare for moose. In the survival school, however, they felt that if you snare large animals like deer and moose, they would twist or braid 3 of them together, and then it was strong enough. So maybe that tells you what length you should bring. I find that a functional length of any material, whether it's paracord or dental floss or whatever, is 7 arm spans. So 7 arm spans as a minimum, 7 arm spans, 7 arm spans. You pack that into the kit, and pretty soon the kit is getting full. Oh, safety pins no end. Well, you probably, that's just since they're there, just that I'm packing this. And of course, since I have the wire on here now, your ability to seal it watertight with this device is, but to keep you from splashing your water when you're carrying it or whatever, you've got that. But that is about basic kit. Now, if I need to snowshoe, you're going to have to add, the snowshoe tie and the lashing cord is there. If you're going to have the coiled up sweet saw blade, there'll have to be bolts in there, because between the mule tape and the blade and the bolts in the ends of the blade, you can fashion a buck saw. Then there's enough string in here to make a pack frame. Try lashing 3 sticks together, and so on. Now I might have had room. This fabric, I attended a workshop on making hammocks. This is the amount of ripstop, and off the internet the person found this was inexpensive, very strong, and it's your ripstop nylon. And here you have enough to fashion a hammock. Something like this is more than enough for me to, so the length I would have would go in the pack frame, go around the 2 bottom parts and around and knot it up front. So you always have some kind of a direction with regard to the length or size or whatever to be functional. And this is a functional hammock, or it's part of the so-called super shelter, which is made of polyethylene, Mylar, reflective Mylar, and some fabric that allows the passage of air, oxygen, to refresh the air and deal with a tendency to end up having condensation. Now this can be twisted into a small enough bundle that would have fit in here, but I would have fit it first before I started packing in, because the rule being with paracord is 7 iron spans as a start, and when you finish packing the kit in the still room, fill it full of paracord. You can buy the paracord in many different colors, but instead of some of the probably I would replace this. This is the volume of this fabric when it's properly rolled up, so I would replace it. So here I want to have the makings. I want a pot, I want a super shelter, I want a buck saw, a Roycroft pack frame as a starter for the versatility of the things that I would carry. On me, I would carry my knife with the fire. I have backup fire there. Now when I am in tick country, where there is lots of ticks, and in snake country, where generally I would say, if I am in snake and tick country, I probably want to bring a tent with a floor in it. If you look hard enough, you'll probably find that in Africa, you're safe from the hyenas and the lions, because if you put up a tent, they see it as a solid object and they don't rip the tent apart to get at you. Whereas our bears are smarter than that. Put up a tent, they decide they want to get into the tent, they tear it apart. So you can't use a tent to protect yourself from creatures as vicious as lions and hyenas. But anyway, but then you have snakes, and if you're worried about the snake population being great enough that you're sleeping somewhere in the bush and a snake discovers your warmth and you wake up with a snake coil on your chest, maybe you want something more. That is, you either want to factor in the super shelters made that it's snake proof. And if you've got a floor in a shelter, that means that ticks cannot discover you while you're trying to sleep, because generally probably the opportunity, the driest, most comfortable places in the South Country here, not far from here, is where the ticks prefer to live. Under the big spruce trees where the organic material stays dry, you're apt to encounter a lot of ticks there. Now you have the pot, and you might say a bag like this so you can take all the items out, or a bag to be a spare carrying device, or perhaps even a balloon. I often carry a balloon that can be fashioned into a bladder. You have the the material here. There's a way to fold, like we fold paper cups. You fold the fabric and it will be the envelope, and with your extra safety pins you pin it so it stays together. You put a balloon in there and you will carry a prodigious amount of water with that arrangement because you brought a little bit of fabric. In mosquito country, a lot to be said as psychologically. There aren't many things in the forest that will impinge on your sanity as the mosquitoes and the black flies. So in that time of year, you better think about how you're going to cope with them. You have to train yourself to learn to use smoke and so on, but generally having a head net that's suitable to... Now a head net itself, when its drawstring becomes a bag for emptying, so having a bag in here has its merits rather than just a plastic bag. But a plastic bag inside this head net becomes another water carrying device. Now pots vary, and some are awkward to stow. There was a time when a lot of fluids, liquids, oils in the grocery store came in cans like this. That's 4 liters. That becomes your survival kit container, and you pack this. And at one time I used to pack a 7-pound kit that included everything that I've discussed in there, and including a down jacket in one of these. And the elastics that are on the outside, plus the cordage can go on the outside. The issue here is that these are your snowshoe bindings. Part of you make toe loops, and away you go. The holes are already pre-made. There would be some merit to having a tight-fitting lid that allows you to close the survival kit. Now I'm going to probably talk about kits again and again, but if we edit this presentation, it's already a fairly long presentation.